Okay, all right. We will call to order the meeting of the Budget Committee Wednesday, December 11th. Thank you, everyone, for coming in the ugly weather. Can I have someone volunteer to say the Pledge of Allegiance to kick us off? Debbie? Sure, thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good job, baby. Oh, thanks.
Thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
All right. First order of business is approving the minutes from the last meeting on November 13th that I think Neil circulated.
Yes,
Their motion to approve.
so moved.
Second.
Great. Then, do we have anyone? Okay. Neil, we don't have a budget committee member on Zoom.
We do not.
Okay, great. Then I think we can voice vote the approval. Are all the ayes in favor?
Yes.
Aye.
Aye.
Any nays? Okay, I think the ayes have it. So the meeting minutes from November 13th are approved. And that brings us to our main agenda item of the night, which is the presentation of the town proposed budget. So the floor is yours, Mr. Cobb.
Thank you, and thank you everyone on the committee and in the audience for coming on this beautiful evening. Ready, Neil?
Just about. Yes.
Okay. It may seem that I say this every year, but this year has been a very challenging budget year. What is the appropriate level of service, and how do we meet increasing demands and requirements? How do we continue to tackle our ongoing capital needs? How do we remain very mindful that taxpayers have just received tax bills that collect 2.7 million more in 2024 than was collected in 2023 for the town, school, and county combined? So with the realities that we're facing, the select board kept several goals in the forefront as this budget was created. Maintaining our current level of service, assuring that we are competitive with salaries and benefits so that we can retain our current staff and fill positions where we do lose staff. We have an experienced, dedicated staff that we want to maintain, and this is very cost effective over time. Continuing to move forward with addressing our capital needs, including culverts and bridges, and especially this year, the closing of the lagoons at the transfer station and removing the sludge from our wastewater facility lagoons, and realizing the burden that the decision that are made in the past have an impact on each and every taxpayer, some of whom have less of an ability to pay than others. The budget that is adopted each year is the spending plan for that year, but it is but 1 year in a plan that is mindful of the past years and cognizant of the coming years. This is why we have a 20-year capital expenditure plan. Highlights of the accomplishments in 2024 include the rebuilding of Briar Hill Road from Pennacook Road to Patch Road. The road was completely rebuilt, creating a new solid base, which means that pavement will last much longer. We were able to rebuild much more of the road than we had originally planned. The intersection at Pennacook was also reconfigured as part of the project. The top coat of pavement will be put in on the rebuilt section in 2025 using remaining bond money. Funded by a grant from the New Hampshire DES and the Inflation Reduction Act, a solar array has been installed at the wastewater treatment facility that will provide enough electricity to power the treatment facility and the pump station in Riverway Park. The project, I'm happy to say, went live last week. The solar power is expected to save over $20,000 a year in electric costs. A new fire tanker truck was purchased in 2024 replacing two over 30-year-old trucks, and new highway trucks were purchased following our capital plan, which replaces those trucks at the most cost-effective time. One of the three transfer station trailers was also replaced. It was also over 30 years old. The complete revaluation of the town was completed as required every 5 years by New Hampshire Department of Revenue Administration. The goal is to have all properties assessed at fair market value, assuring a fair and equitable distribution of the tax burden. The town hall was painted after more than 40 years, assuring it is protected and looking great. It is also worth noting the work of the Community Power Committee, which facilitated the launch of Community Power in October, which is projected to save Hopkinton electric users over $100,000 in just the first 4 months. So as we begin to look at the 2025 portion of the plan, let me start by thanking those involved in the budget process, starting with our department heads and the committees and their budgets, other staff that was involved in the process, Finance Director Kaylee Henley, Neil, the Select Board, and I want to specifically thank the CIP Committee for its hard work. It is a team effort to bring the proposed budget to this point. To summarize what is being presented tonight, the Select Board proposal results in an estimated amount to be raised by taxes of an increase of 2.99%. This increase equates to an estimated 15-cent increase in the tax rate. The initial draft of this proposal had an 18% increase without using any fund balance, and that was before department heads, CIP committee, and the Select Board made changes. Just looking at the operating budget, it is proposed a 2.65% increase over last year's budget. So the budget process to date. Back in August, the department heads started preparing their budgets with the continuing guidance to focus on needs, not wants, as much as possible, while looking for additional cost-effective ways to improve services in town. And as usual, they did a great job. I'll note that the budget books you've received contains a one-page information prepared by each department head, and we hope this gives you more additional information, and we anticipate they'll be more helpful as we use them in succeeding years. Next, the department heads met with the town administrator and finance director to review their requests. This resulted in the department head's proposed budget, which was provided to the Select Board on November 5. Then the Select Board started the process of meeting with each department head to review and scrutinize their requests, including capital ones. The board separately received the recommendations of the CIP committee. For the presentation and discussion regarding the transfer station, the Hopkinton Select Board was joined by the Webster Select Board as their joint owners of the facility. Then the Select Board began the work of reviewing the initial proposals. All knew that given the goals for the year, changes had to be made to the proposal. With help from staff and especially the CIP committee, this proposal was created and adopted by the board. Over 35 changes in line items were made to the original operating budget requests for a reduction of about $80,000. The single largest reduction was in the area of assessing professional services of $27,000 due to encumbering funds from the 2024 budget to cover these projected costs. Since no other single reduction exceeded $10,000, instead of going into detail on them, unless you have questions, I'll refer you to page 90 of the budget book. And as far as changes to proposed appropriations to capital reserves, we adopted the changes made by the CIP committee, which reduced the proposed increase in capital projects from 78% increase to 26% by prioritizing which projects need to be funded now. The priorities established by the CIP committee and adopted by the Select Board are public safety, roads, and required environmental issues. The CIP committee also worked hard to create a more level spending plan into the future while addressing the needs, including the transfer station lagoon cleanup and sludge removal at the transfer station. Now let's look at the details of this proposal. Operating revenue, including sewer fund revenue, is projected to increase by $135,000 or 3.18% over 2024. The main drivers are, due to the revised transfer station fee schedule, revenue from commercial haulers, disposal fees, additional revenues from recycling, less revenues from green bags, net results in a $67,000 increase in its revenues. The sale of tax deeded property is anticipated to increase by $45,000. There's a housing grant of $43,000, which is also, though, an expense in the operating budget for a zero net bottom impact. And to comply with the New Hampshire DRA chart of accounts, about $50,000 has been shifted among revenue accounts, again, with no net change.
I'm really sorry.
Sewer revenues are proposed to stay basically flat in order to match operating expenses for the sewer system. Now, on the operating budget expense side, the operating budget, including sewer expenses, is being proposed by the Select Board to increase by 2.65% or $258,000 over 2024. The major drivers, the major changes over $10,000 are listed on page 89 of the budget book. Of those, by far the largest is $95,509 for a 3% merit wage pool for our very deserving town employees. The only increases given to employees is the merit increase. We have no grades or cost of living increases or union. And the $95,000 also includes related benefits. Health insurance and a reserve for health insurance deductibles totaling $49,000, which is a 5% increase in total. This is lower than other years due to a deductible option provided to employees in 2024 that most took advantage of, and results in a smaller increase in the costs than we've seen in prior years. As I mentioned in the section on revenues, here is reflected the expense related to the housing grant of $43,000. Highway shimming and paving, as in prior years, is increasing by 5% or $27,000. Engineering costs related to the transfer station lagoons is down $50,000 due to encumbrances from the 2023 budget and the completion of the design phase. Long-term bond principal and interest payments down a combined $14,000, and all other changes are below $20,000. The Select Board is proposing $1,296,000 to go into capital reserve funds in 2025, or $266,000 or 25.83% over 2024. The entire 20-year capital expenditure and maintenance plan can be found on pages 92 through 95 of the budget book. $746,000 of this appropriation funds the replacement of vehicles and equipment for the fire department, police department, highway department, transfer station, and for the required revaluation. $350,000 is being proposed to go into the road and bridge CRF. The majority of these funds will be used in 2026 through 2028 to help cover the estimated costs for fixing the East Pennacook Road Bridge and the Broad Cove Bridge to the tune of $1.4 million. There is about $640,000 remaining in the Briar Hill Road bond. Those funds will be used to rebuild as much more of Briar Hill as funds remain and to put a final pavement on the part that was rebuilt. The expectation is not all of Briar Hill will be redone. $200,000 into the sludge removal and sewer equipment CRF for generator replacement at the pump station and starting to reserve funds for sludge removal and sewer plant upgrades in future years. And the CIP committee, as I understand, is continuing to work to keep the expenses as level as possible moving forward. Maintenance trust funds being requested are 118,500, a 16,500 or 16% increase over 2024. 105,000 is proposed to go into the town facilities maintenance trust with the replacement of the Slusher Center air conditioning and sewer building renovations planned for 2025. The remainder of the appropriations go into maintenance of recreation facilities, replacing library computers, and for library building maintenance. On the fund balance, you can find the fund balance review on page 3 of your budget book. For 2025, we're proposing to use 360,000 of the fund balance, which is quite consistent with prior years. In both 2023 and 24, we had budgeted 360,000 also, even though we only had to use 200,000 in 2024 to meet the tax rate that was estimated at town meeting. So as you can see on page 1 of your budget book, the select board is proposing that the amount to be raised by taxes in 2025 over 2024 is 203,000, which equates to an estimated tax rate of $5.02 or 15 cents or 2.99% higher than the 2024 town tax rate. With the townwide reval this past year, our tax rate estimate is created using the actual 2024 valuation with no estimated increase, as we have used in prior years. The select board is also will be proposing 3 bonds in 2025, all related to sludge. The first one is for the cleanup of the lagoons at the transfer station. The second is for the sludge removal at the wastewater treatment facility, which will be substantially less expensive because of the work done by the first bond. And the third bond is for 120,000 for maintenance work to the sewer systems, with a grant from New Hampshire DES covering 100,000 of that cost, leaving the town portion at 20,000. So on the transfer station lagoon closing bond, there are 5 septic lagoons located at the transfer station where commercial haulers for many years brought Hopkinton septic waste. In the early part of 2022, the town became aware that the permit for the facility would be very difficult, if not impossible, to renew, and decided to close the lagoons. All facilities like this one throughout the state will be closing. Testing of the material showed that PFAS is present, increasing the cost dramatically. We are fortunate that this site is next to the closed landfill, so groundwater monitoring is already taking place in the area. The cost to close this site is $4,115,000. Need a drink.
You say that again?
4,015,000.
Thank you.
So why do the closing now? There are several factors that dictate this closure should happen now. The lagoons are contributing to groundwater contamination in violation of New Hampshire DES and EPA groundwater quality standards. Off-site disposal, if we don't contain it on-site, is estimated to cost over $14 million. We've received a grant from the New Hampshire DES Clean Water Revolving Fund, which allows us to borrow money at low interest and grants a $401,000 loan forgiveness. The sludge has to be removed from the wastewater treatment facility lagoons, and if this project is done now, that sludge can be contained at the transfer station, saving us additional substantial costs. And delay means that the cost of this and the requirements for doing this are only going to increase. The advantages of the revolving fund, the lagoon cleanup bond is estimated to be $4,015,000, over 20 years with 401,000 of that amount forgiven through the DES Clean Water Fund. Until the project is completed, there will be a bridge or construction loan at 1% interest. The construction loan interest is included in the CIP spreadsheets for $20,000 in 2025, with Webster paying $5,000 or 25% of that amount. And for 2026, we assumed interest of $40,000, with Webster again being responsible for 25% or $10,000. After that, once the project is completed, the annual bond costs for Hopkinton will start at about $220,000 a year, and then the cost will decline about $5,000 to $6,000 annually thereafter. And we've assumed a 3.072 interest rates. For the wastewater sludge removal bond, will be for up to $1 million for sewer sludge removal, which will be done in conjunction with the lagoon cleanup. By doing it this way should save the town potentially millions. This would be a 10-year bond with costs assumed to start in 2026 at $140,000 and decreasing by $4,000 annually. The interest rate is assumed to be 4%. The reason this bond is for only 10 years is that sludge removal is largely maintenance and will have to be done again in 10 to 20 years. The final bond, and by far the smallest, that we're requesting this year is because we received a grant for $100,000 of the $120,000 cost. The grant is also from the Clean Water Revolving Fund and needs to be treated as a bond. This bond is largely to gather information on the sewer pipes we have, including running a camera through them all. This will allow for future planning and help to determine if stormwater is infiltrating the system. This unfortunately has to be approved as a bond at town meeting in order to receive the forgiveness. The first year payment is estimated to be $2,000. With that, I'll take a drink and take questions.
The slides on the capital improvement and the capital reserve, those are separate warrant articles.
Yes.
Is Webster have a corresponding article, or how do they handle their town's approval, if at all?
No, we just bill them.
All that. They build it into their operating budget.
Yes. Yeah.
Are they, I guess, in our agreement with Webster and transfer stations costs, which I was updated recently, are they on the hook for this 25% for both, irrespective of what their town decides to do, supporting their operating?
The way I understand it, they're on the hook for 25%. If they're, I don't know what would happen if their town voted it down.
And on the fund balance, and just because I haven't seen it before, can you just explain the year-end fund balance 2.489? And what's the delta between that and the 2025 5% retainage? How does that math exactly work?
What is the 5% retainage?
Well, 5% of what? Because the difference between those two numbers is not 5%. And then what happens to the $1 million?
That 5%, I believe, is of the total taxes that the town would be on the hook for as a reserve. The town collects through our town tax collector, the funds for the school, the counties and everything. And then 5% of that we have to put aside in case there's non-payment.
Got it. And that's the 1.7 number.
Yes.
So 2.4 is the year-end balance, less that 5% set aside is the 757.
Yes,
Of which we're allocating 360 to the budget.
correct.
Got it. Thanks.
Couple of nitpicking questions, just going through this today. The pilot Well, the Hopkinton Fairgrounds is at zero at this point. What's the strategy behind that where they have been paying 47,000 a couple of years ago?
I don't know if I can say anything in public session.
In negotiation.
Okay. Can you say why it was zero the year before, this current year?
Same.
It's in negotiation.
Yeah.
Okay,
Let me just say, there was a court case that they are relying on. I think it was the Rochester Fair.
I don't know about that one.
They didn't have to pay anything,
Okay,
but we think there's a difference.
good. I hope there is.
So,
Moving on to the pay per bag revenue is obviously shown way down. Is that going to be a presentation at the town meeting for the town to decide whether they want to continue with it or
Yes.
get rid of it? Good.
They may be battling
Right.
warrant articles. I don't know.
But from a budget perspective, not planning on any revenue from green bags?
What we were including in here is what we've received already. We're always a year behind.
It's 18,000. I mean, it's down.
It's down
Yeah.
considerably.
I got someone that was, but I'm going to let other people chime in.
I have a smattering of questions. Regarding the remaining bond money for Briar Hill. I think you said 660,000.
Yes,
Does that cover the top coat or the top layer for the entire portion that was rebuilt?
correct. And as well, it's going to be used to extend what's rebuilt somewhat. And then, but enough will be used so that everything can be recoated at that point, everything that was rebuilt.
I'm sorry, these are in no particular order.
Sure.
I appreciated these executive summary pages in front of the detailed budget. And I'm wondering, are you gonna put those or something like them into the town report?
We hadn't talked about it, but I think it's a good idea.
They're great. It's worth it because you put a lot of effort into them.
The department heads and Neil put a lot of effort. into
Good
it.
job.
It was a budget committee kind of request last year.
I have a couple of questions regarding things that are out of our control, but that change. So I noticed that regardless of how many restaurants or hotels we have, we get a certain number from the state for rooms and meals tax. Do we know why we get as much as we get? Like how are we calculated to get $580,000? Is it population
It's
based?
statutory. There's a formula.
Okay, yeah, but it's okay. It's just a formula.
We could get that, but I think a lot of things go into that, but it does not matter how many restaurants are in Hopkinton.
And then for our flood control reimbursement, why does that number bop around? I mean, it changes slightly, but like, it's not as if we're dedicating more land to controlling the river. Why does that number change?
It's based on assessed value.
Oh, okay. For the wastewater sewage removal, what's the right word for sludge? For the wastewater sludge removal and transportation to the capped pile of septage, is the engineering done?
No, and so that $1 million may be a high we're hoping it's a high number and that can still come down.
Okay, and so that would include what I just said, sort of dredging and transporting it
Yes.
to the pit or whatever we're calling it. Are both the sludge removal and the septage containment compelled by the Department of Environmental Services?
The containment, yes, the sludge,
not required, but it's required maintenance for any system. It's been in the CIP plan for years, estimated at about $200,000. Clearly, because of PFAS, that changed. It used to be you would dewater it, mix it with mulch, and spread it on fields, and that no longer is possible. So that's why even though we had planned for it, the costs are substantially more.
Right, because it's no longer able to be applied to land.
Right. And so those lagoons are filling up with sludge, just like you pump your home septic. It's kind of the same thing. And if Dave's watching, he'll correct me tomorrow, but it's kind of like that. You have to take that sludge out every
Right.
so often, every 20 years or so.
Okay, understood. And so I think I've asked you this question before, but at least for the septic lagoons, what happens if we don't pass the bond at town meeting?
We don't know if DES would just take over and mandate doing it or would fine us or give us a 1 year delay. It's an unknown at this point.
Okay, so we could potentially face some sort of monetary fines or other sort of government coercion if we don't follow our plan.
My understanding is we could, yeah.
You're also going to, I think you're going to have to do this at some point. You're going to see those costs go up. And right now we have the grant from the Clean Water Revolving Fund. So that interest rate is much lower. The advantage of not having bond counsel, there are things there, as well as the 1% during construction, and the $401,000 forgiveness. They're not going to give that to us again if we don't do it now.
Mhm.
So those are choices people will have to weigh.
Right, absolutely. Okay, I think that's it.
I'm just trying to understand I'm on page 11, the landfill commercial. The fees received from commercial haulers that dump, it looks like select board increased that, so have the fees gone up on the commercial haulers?
Yes,
And that includes the people that collect the trash and bring it to our,
yeah. We had a number of hearings over the summer and the fall with Webster and revised the whole fee schedule.
and how is that so far? Any information back on that? Because is that being passed on to the people that are having the actual trash collected, I assume, and just wondering how that's gone in town.
That I don't know the
No
answer.
feedback.
Becky's shaking her head. Becky is.
Yeah, I mean, my empty trash bill went up.
Do you feel supportive of that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Choice.
Not a lot of choice, no, just, and then the other thing is the fees received from the sale of recyclables. Could you explain that a little?
I guess we're getting more revenues for our recyclables.
That's good. And so
Absolutely.
how are we doing as a town with the recyclables? We're not
I'm
using
sure we
green
could do-
bags.
I'm sure we could do better. I had asked the question after we revised the fee schedule and indicated there hasn't been enough time to analyze if,
But it sounds like the town is really on board with the recycling, that we are moving forward and continuing to do it even without the use of the green.
I think that's a fair statement.
Thank you.
On the same topic that we just talked about, I'm on page 17. This is the $100,000 award that we've got. I'm just just interesting. What's the horizontal infrastructure scoping? What did anybody have any idea what that actually means?
That's the horizontal of the pipes. So that's the cameraing of the third bond, which is $120,000 bond, of which $100,000, which is listed there, is forgiven.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
that was what I called the camera ring.
Thank you.
Mark.
A couple things. Debbie, just to pick up what you were asking, were you asking, is our town recycling at a appropriate rate?
Yes, and also if we are not just at an appropriate rate, but that we're seeing people really on board with the recycling, that we've increased what we're recycling, how that is. And all that still without the use of the green bags. I'm just trying to get.
Okay. So I am curious about that. Because there's a difference between, are we increasing our recycling rate versus are we getting more revenue for what we're recycling? Those aren't the same things. And what I have heard from the solid waste committee is that our recycling rate is low in Hopkinton compared to comparable towns with comparable options, not single stream recycling, but and that our town has continued to be quite low recycling rate.
That's disappointing.
I would agree, the recycling rate is lower than we would like it to be. And we've tried to put up signage and things like that. I mean, I'll go there and be putting things in recycling and see, other people will say to somebody, that's not where it's supposed to go. It's supposed to go there, or going to the hopper and go, well, why don't you put the cardboard in, recycling as opposed to put it in the hopper? So I think a lot of people are aware and are taking steps also.
Yeah, I think we should just be clear as a budget committee, because it is a revenue line.
Mhm.
It's a revenue line that would be higher if we had a higher recycling rate in our town. If we had a recycling rate that we should be able to achieve in the town of Hopkinton, we would have more recycling revenue to offset our expenses, and our rate is low.
I appreciate that, Mark.
And this is not the point blaming anybody. I know we're trying, but I think it's a fact that our rate is lower than comparable sized towns with comparable recycling opportunities.
Do we know, do we have the numbers? Just so.
Wasn't that
Waste-
reported to us last year by the,
Yeah.
it's actually a waste reduction committee?
Yeah.
So they've
You're
been
right.
tracking, that's.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it was last year, we did have, was it in our,
NRRA.
it came and infected an audit and talked about the process there. And I don't think there were any real issues with the process. It's more education.
No, it was the fact that it's like somewhat surprising to me that in a town like Hopkinton, the recycling rate is actually lower than towns that are comparable to us in size. And it sounds minor, but the number one thing that our taxpayers can do to reduce their tax bill is to recycle, because one, we're getting paid for the recycling, and two, we're taking it out of the waste stream that we have to pay to dispose of. And I don't think as a community that we've done as good a job as we could to get that message out there.
I wonder if we could do like a mailer or something, on my Eversource bill, it tells me how I rank compared to my neighbors in electricity usage. Feel like a good shame campaign. Hopkinton's recycling rate is 5% and Henniker's is 10%. I mean, whatever.
Because I remember the discussions, though, previous to this meeting, all through the year about the recycling part. I came out of the meetings basically hearing that if to get higher recycling, you've got to have more policing. And more policing means more employees, higher salaries, higher costs. And at that meeting, there was no consensus that group was recommending that we should spend that kind of money to do it. And no one really wanted to take on that position to doing it. That's it obviously can be done. Other towns I hear, when Neil goes, there's a lot more surveillance, if you will, when you go into it. If you go to Bradford, I hear that there's a lot more surveillance of getting, people to do what they should be doing, but it just doesn't happen.
A lot of communities have mandatory recycling, so people are required to do that, but that's not ever been the case here.
My friend Charlie lives in Marlboro and they require you to use clear garbage bags so that they can regard what you're throwing away.
To Mark's point, it might be worth digging into what's going on there, because my understanding was, and I was just trying to find a chart, but I can find it, a couple years ago, the price of recycled PET eclipsed the price of virgin PET. And so that means that this recyclable material is a lot more valuable than it once was. And if that's what's driving the revenue increase, then it would behoove us to invest much more in whatever it takes to increase the volumes, because it's a lot more valuable than it used to be.
This increase definitely reflects the market, not an increase in recycling rate, just to be clear.
And the employees at the transfer station are also doing a good job of making sure that our recyclables are desirable.
Yes, yeah, we do quite a bit that brings those values up, some of the separations and things like that.
The only thing I'd like to add is that this transfer station needs more storage before we can,
That is true.
set aside more bales, because they have to be stored under cover so they don't degrade by the sunlight.
Can I had a, I go to a couple of them. Sorry, I opened up recycling box. Just happen to believe in it. Maybe you mentioned this. If you did, apologies. Can you speak to the sale of town lands? The sale of town land. There was a red. You spoke to it. I'm sorry. I missed it.
I just had indicated that for revenue purposes, we're assuming an increase of 45,000. And that's more or less due to unpaid taxes. And I think more specifically, that was Neil's estimate. And he's much closer to the issue.
So we have a couple properties that are under agreement that are being purchased back by the previous owner. And we do have some properties that most likely will be sold in the spring.
Sold for back tax because they're.
Yes, so they'd be auctioned off. The town only keeps what it's owed, which would be back taxes, penalties, interest. 15% of the value when it was taken also is a penalty, and everything else goes back to the previous owner. So just, you don't necessarily, if the market's changed, we don't necessarily make more money on it, but we do get what's owed us.
And then just lastly, Ken, just to go over once again, the payment schedule on the bonds. Can you show us, not necessarily today, but maybe when we come back in January, like the 10-year run? I think what I wanted to try to understand is, maybe it's in here.
It's in here.
It is, okay. So as these bond payments start coming in, what are we looking at in the 2027, 28 budgets? Because we're not going to see much impact in 25, but it sounds like we'll start to see it in 26 and 27.
If you would look at page 94 of the book. That recognizes when the larger bond payments, let's say, would be starting and what they would be on an annual basis. So if I look at line 159, transfer station lagoon closing. And you would see on for 2027, it would be 291,000, but then 25% of that would be paid by Webster.
Where's the sewage sludge? The sludge removal.
That's on page 93, line
106.
109.
109.
Oh,
That one would be starting also in 2026 for 145,000 in year one.
Thank you. And I think what's catching my attention, the reason that I'm asking is just thinking out in a multi-year way, as I know the select board is as well. I think in just in that section, sludge removal, maybe I want to make sure if I'm understanding it right. In 2027, not only we'll have the 140,000 for the sludge removal bond, which will have started in 26, but we've also got potentially. Right, 98,000 pump station bond, 250 sewer plant upgrade.
Okay, Mark, that's why on page 94, lines 176 through 179, we look at on an annual basis for each year what the cost is for capital projects, for bond payments and other, and basically those are the two. And then you would see on line 183, the projected percentage change year over year there.
And that's super helpful.
And this was something that certainly the CIP committee really tried to focus on and help us to somewhat levelize, as opposed to seeing a big jump in 1 year.
And I think one of their goals is to level this even more. It's still there's still some places that need some work. Yeah.
What I see it from a budget committee standpoint is that we're leveling up. Yeah, right. Like these are needs, they're real needs. So it's not a matter of whether they're real needs. It's more that we're at 2,037,024. We're gonna bump up to 2.7 million in 2027. And generally sort of stay in that ballpark for a few years, and then we do a little bit of up and down, but we should be prepared to be leveling up at a what's about 15% more than we are today by committing to some of these things.
I think I'm not sure if I'm agreeing with you. I think I am. That, by seeing this going out, so many years, the budget committee, select board can see, okay, what's the potential increase percentage wise or dollar wise?
Yeah, I mean, not all of those will be voted on this year.
Yeah.
We have this constant bubble that is in the current year facing you, and the CIP, we keep just kicking that down the road further, just trying to level it out. And again, the monster of roads and culverts is always in your face in this whole project. And then you throw in the lagoons, that's a real complication.
Yeah, so it's being eyes wide open.
Right? Yes.
Without being eyes wide
Right.
open, which you're doing here. So, and I'm just trying to understand which lines to focus on in the spreadsheet, which you have pointed out.
To follow up on what Mark's saying, that kind of the 10,000 foot view that Jonathan used to be so fond of. If it hadn't been for the septic lagoon, we probably would have been talking about another $2 million road bond this year or next year to address the deficit that we have on our road. And, this kind of just puts us back another 2-3 years before we can realistically think about that again. But the needs for the road work hasn't gone away, and every day we wait, it gets more expensive.
We're putting was 300,000 or so
understood,
into
and more
reserve,
shipping and payment.
and what we hadn't been really aware of until fairly recently is the potential of having to do the bridge work on Pennacook Road near the transfer station entrance, and what's the other road?
Broad Cove.
Broad Cove Bridge culvert.
The inspections on both those this year found that they deteriorated much more quickly than they were predicted to. But we're almost at the end of culverts, so I think every culvert we have left is listed here. So there shouldn't be any.
Is that like deteriorated quickly? Like you got to repair this next year before a car falls through it?
It's getting closer to that.
Right.
The divers from the state came and did the full inspection, and it moved it up a notch from where we expected it to be and where it had been.
I have a few questions, and I'm just gonna kind of run through them. They're all like sort of weirdly specific, but on the AS Professional Services, I see that that is like, much higher than the. First of all, the year to date is lower relative to the budget of 56,000. This is on page 21. And then we're budgeting 83,000, which is much higher than all the prior years. I see that there's a new 5-year contract that it says, is that just like our contract ran out and now they get to hike prices, so they did?
Want me to take that? So there's a couple things. We put assessing out to bid.
Mhm.
And so we will have a new assessor. Our assessor is actually retiring, but so there was an increase, which I think we would have seen just given that we had had a solid no increase over 5 years. There also is, if you look at the CIP plan, that expenditure and appropriation for a reval is much lower. It's only $9,000 a year, where it was closer to 30 or between 30 and 40,000. More of that has been moved into the operating budget because it's a yearly expense now, and it seems more appropriate to do it that way. And we're only setting aside the 5th year reval amount in the CIP. So yes, it is up. We felt like we were able to bring it down, so we kept it level in the proposed budget because we have money left that will encumber. We also, it's an hourly rate that we pay. So we budget, the original budget included kind of what we thought the highest end would be. And because we can encumber funds, we're going to leave it and we'll have a better track record with what we really need as we switch to the new assessors. I think we'll be getting better service, more public service in what we're getting. So I think we're hoping we'll be paying about the same amount, but be getting more service for that.
Okay, I guess I'm just a little confused because we did the reval this past year, so I would think like it would go down. And like, why was it 16,000 in 2023, but then that was not a reval year? So that's like,
Sure.
do you know what I
So,
mean? It's just like bumpy, weird way.
there's a couple different parts to a reval. First, and what we do is a cyclical revaluation. So for the first 4 years, 25% of properties will be reviewed each year for the physical things at the house, decks and bathrooms and things like that. And then in the 5th year, sales are compared, and the model that's used, the algorithms that put the values together, are all updated. So that's your expensive year, as well as there is a review of all the sales and a review of really sort of checking up on what's been done over the last 4 years. So,
Okay.
so that is all now, instead of coming out of the capital reserve fund, will be part of the regular budget to do that. But the actual final statistical update is in the capital fund.
Okay.
I don't think I've answered it.
Maybe I can ask slightly different. So do we expect the 12,000 year to date to bump up to 56,000 by the end of the year? Like in 2 weeks?
We don't. I think more of their funds, because it was a reval year, more of sort of the actual assessing was covered under the reval, which came out of the capital reserve, versus the budget. Like when you're doing pickups, which is when somebody's has a building permit and they go out, that was done as part of the reval, not part of the pickups.
Okay, so you're saying we probably spent the money, it just because of the year.
It just came out of a different place. Yes.
Okay. Next, the legal services. So just on the next page, the top line, 2022 or 2022. I see the select board already brought it down. But we're still budgeting like $4,000 more over a year to date, which is still, 4,000 or so more dollars in 2023. And then in 2022, we had very low legal expenses. So what kind of drives those? And are we confident we need 22,000 budgeted?
You mentioned the pilots.
Yes. Yeah, Don's question was relevant to legal expenses.
Okay.
We,
So that's
we
it.
have, we have an assessing case that has been ongoing that they've taken to court. They actually have appealed other years and we've gone to BTOA and won. So that's coming forward. There are several sort of things going on
Okay,
that we anticipate that probably will be needed. We're close to wrapping up our Eversource case. We only have 2017 left. Other towns are still doing that. So there's been some ongoing things.
I'm making my way through, sorry. Okay, so then on page 26. Um. Building repairs is budgeted at 25,000, over 20,000 last year, but then the year before that was 31 and 20 the year before. I assume this is like, there's some kind of plan behind this that gives us. Like, we know what we want to do this year with that, kind of like a CIP, but more like ongoing maintenance stuff.
There is, and actually we'll be pretty close to, we will expend this year's amount
Okay,
totally. And they just plan projects that way.
and then I think this is my last question. For the central NH regional planning dues. The same page.
Mhm.
That seemed new in 2024. Where did that come from and why do we need to spend that?
We've always expended it. It was in the planning budget under professional services, which last year was the first year it got its own line, which matches the DRA recommended accounting. For some reason, it
Okay.
had never been separated.
Okay.
So planning professional services dropped last year to account for this.
Okay, got it. Those were my specific questions. Thanks, Neil.
While you're on that same page, I think it's page 27. The housing grant, 43,000. What does that do?
That's the housing consultant. So that's a grant that's offset by revenue on the other side. Right now, that's what they're studying. A lot of you have been invited to take part in their interviews, and so they're gathering information, and we'll have a report in March that will go to the housing committee and the planning board to see if people want changes and.
All gamut of zoning changes and.
Correct. But this is sort of, a lot of this is the public input to sort of gather what the town really wants to do.
That'll be interesting.
If it should.
Nice to see us earning some interest on the
Yeah.
balances. I'm
Oh.
curious what the implied interest rate is, the 250,000 we anticipate earning in 25, or it's actually 280 with the checking account.
In the 4 to 5% range.
Yeah, I think it's just over 5 right now, which is,
And we anticipate it being something slightly less than that in 24 or 25.
yes. And we also anticipate, as we've expended the road bond money, that's no longer, we're paying interest, not getting it. So
And is that, it's in some sort of CD ladder or something, or is it all in a money market account?
I think it is in a CD, some in CDs and some is just a money market account. Kelly Henley, who's the finance director, and Joel, whose name I just lost. Moyer, thank you. The treasurer have worked on that and researched different things.
It's a healthy number. That's great.
Yes, for sure.
Can you bring your presentation back up, Ken? Maybe I missed, so it's the 203,000 change of the amount to be raised by taxes. Like maybe right at the start somewhere. Basically I'm looking for the, and I think I was deep in the book. Is that inclusive of the, I guess the warrant articles are bonds that are not going to take effect this year, so.
Other than the bridge loan amount. That would be net for 15,000, I believe, for Hopkinton. That would be in there.
Okay. And so the warrant articles for the bonds are really like, that's not accounted for in the 2.99 because it's not taking effect this year. So how can, what I'm trying to figure out is how do we think about the combined impact, sort of like, hey, this year it's increasing 2.99, but these bonds are going to have like, they're gonna hit
Well-
us next. I mean, I know we cover it. I'm just trying to think of like, I think in past years, we've been asked for like total impact of all the things voters are approving.
We can give a 10-year. We have pretty close to done a 10-year sort of look at that operating budget and how much that goes up, bonds as they're proposed,
Yeah,
as well as capital expenses, to give that sense.
right.
Well, when you present the warrant articles, it'll have for.
It will.
It will, but then like, I'm just trying to think of simplifying it for the taxpayer. Like, so this year it's gonna be 2.99. That's what they're voting on. But then if they also vote yes for the bonds, then next year, let's assume the operating budget goes up like 2%, and then the bonds are coming in, which are a baked in like
Mhm.
5% increase or something. Then next year, we're gonna be sitting here starting from like a 7%.
Yeah.
Do you see what I'm saying?
That's what I was getting at. For 2027.
I think because of the reval, the percent change is a more useful figure than the cents per thousand.
No, I think you're right on it. We ought to be looking out 2 or 3 years to say, if you put this in, this is what you're gonna hit with next year. In 26.
Cause you're like, it's like next year you're starting from an increase
Correct.
relative to this year.
I think what you just said, Joe, would be very helpful to present to the public.
And I think you're doing that for all the entities to present at each meeting, not 10 years, but at least this year's impact.
Take note, Ken, the chair said 2%.
I'm not going to be on the board next year, so.
Uh, Any other questions?
I was just wondering if you could explain a little bit better the second bond, the one for $1 million to take the sludge from our ponds and then taking it across town. And I realize you said it was going to hopefully cost less than $1 million, but just simply taking the sludge from one side of the town to the other, there must be something a lot more involved to cost $1 million.
Yeah, that should drop substantially. The $1 million was sort of before, so we haven't changed that, not having that, but we should have that number soon. It really is digging it out, dewatering it, and transporting it across town. So you're right.
But isn't the fact of laying it into that other mass that you've got there, there's got to be an added cost involved with putting that extra amount in there. So
It does. So that added
in this number.
the added cost is in that number because it has to be in the sludge removal part because Webster isn't responsible for that 25%.
Is there any rebuilding of the ponds once the sludge is removed?
No, they're already lined and metal and not metal, but however, I think they're concrete lined.
Okay, this is not a money question, but what happens to the water?
It goes into the current lagoon. You're talking about at the wastewater treatment facility?
If you dewater the sludge and then we put the sludge in the capped pit,
Yes.
where does the toxic water go?
So the water also goes in the pit.
Okay.
So we didn't go through it tonight, but there's basically a pile of dry sludge,
Yep.
a pile of wet sludge, and that wet sludge water will actually sit over next winter and filter down into a pool and then filter into Lagoon 5. So that will be the last closed lagoon, but DS really likes the fact it's staying on site and going right there, but it will be contained.
Full life cycle, though, it gets evaporated, goes up and goes back down again, and you might drink it.
It's not leaching out.
Correct.
So what happens if the town votes down this increase? Like, I know we hate playing those hypotheticals, but I'm sure that the select
Votes
board has
down
thought
the-
about it.
The 2.99.
Yeah,
Well, they'll have to, at town meeting, they have to come out with
sure.
what the number is.
Yes, let me be more specific. Like, let's say the town says 1% is all you get. Or, 0. I'm like, has the select board had this conversation?
We haven't, but as I probably say, whenever a question like
Yes.
that is asked, it's going to come out of roads.
Unless it's taken out of capital. It would depend how voters wanted. If they didn't want to support capital projects,
Mhm.
they could reduce any of the warrant articles or the operating budget.
So what happens if you don't take it out of roads?
Well, as Neil said, maybe we won't put money aside for a fire station, fire equipment. Fire
We're
station.
not doing a fire
Yeah.
station.
I'm asking the question because like, I mean, I realize it's not a fun conversation to have, but I think it's important that we have it. Like, I mean, the
Mhm.
atmosphere out there is a little heated on the tax increases this year, and we should be prepared to like know what that would look like,
Okay, there's,
speak to it.
going to be one warrant article that'll be for the operating budget.
Right.
And that's 2.65% increase. If that is cut to 1%, then I would stand by my statement. I would think it would probably impact roads more than anything. If the voters cut a warrant article that related to capital, then it would be whatever the specific area they cut.
Mhm. And I think, I'm sorry, I think maybe it was you, Mark, I forget who asked the question last time. I think there was a question as to like, can we look at what changes to services would mean in terms of budgetary impact and impact to services? For example, like plowing. I mean, I just saw 2 people slide off the road the other night in a snowstorm, so I'm not saying we should not plow roads, but was that a conversation in the departmental meetings?
That specific thing was not at the select board level.
Okay.
We haven't looked, we haven't.
Like Susan
proposing
Gilbert's
reducing
email had a
staff.
thing from the fire chief that like, he's aware that there were questions about ambulance services
Mhm.
and
With
things like that.
with the ambulance, the chief has had, trouble getting enough paramedics or EMTs on a regular basis.
Actually, can I ask a specific question on that? I was wondering, it says have missed 72nd ambulance calls so far in 23. Does that mean that 2 ambulances were required and we didn't have a second one available? Or does that mean we're not showing up when a second one is called from another town or something else?
I would imagine at least for the most part, it would be that we didn't have in effect 4 people, so they could 2 on each ambulance available.
So another town comes in.
So there are always 2 people on duty. So the first ambulance always rolls right away. The second ambulance is called and per diem and people that are available. So, and there are times during the day, which is why last year some part-time hours were added to bring in a person to be there so that the chief and that other person could respond that second ambulance. So that's often hard to get out. And we see that from other towns too.
So is that 70 number better or worse than it's been in previous years? And is there a mark that the select board has talked about as sort of like a normal level?
I've certainly asked the chief and the responses due to vacancies. I think it's not accomplishing as much as we would have liked. But whenever we can get a second ambulance out, it could be life-saving, just the response time would be that much quicker than an ambulance coming from Concord or wherever. And I would hope that in future years, the chief can have more information.
So the select board is not satisfied with the 70 number, in other words?
Well, not necessarily satisfied with, well, we'd like a full, staffing up to the level we had budgeted for. And I would anticipate because of, if that happened, the 70 would go down.
Got it. So that's why there's the gap between the 124 that was allocated in 24 and the 50 or so year to date, is because there's just not been the labor available.
That's correct. That position actually wasn't created until halfway through the year. And then it has been filled maybe half the time. So they're working to get people that can do that, because that is a part-time fill-in. So it often depends on people's schedules and when they're available. So that position is largely a daytime position, weekdays, because that's when the most second ambulance calls are, and that's when there's the fewest other people in the department available to respond.
So I think I can answer my own question then. The select board would like to see that come down, and that's why the allocation for 25 is the same as 24, despite not spending all that money this year.
Yes.
I'm just curious if I could piggyback on what Krista was talking about for the services for snow, let's say. Is there a base that even if a town were to vote it down, that the town would be required for safety issue, that they at least have to, do something? Nothing.
I don't.
You obviously could be sued
Yes,
for
it is a
negligence.
risk
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Charlie, what page were you
Yeah.
on?
What page was that?
Sorry, 48.
But I think Ken's point was, if you're cutting to level it, 203,000, for example, it's not going to be to not plow the roads. It's going to be to not do other things. So we could say, okay, we're not going to plow the roads, but that's not where you would make your first cuts. Your first cuts probably would be in paving and shimming, because that's the biggest line in the budget. And you would look all the way through to see what other areas you may.
Today, it's a bottom line budget.
Yes.
It is a bottom line budget.
So you're gonna look at it and say, where do we think we can do this budget with the least amount of pain and depending on select.
For instance, the state, they talk about, well, just cut 5% across the board, which is an option. I'm not recommending it at all here, but that's one way to do it.
I mean, plowing specifically, when you sign a commercial contract, you specify what your first plowing is, which I'm sure Neil knows what it is. It's 3 inches or whatever it is in town. And then you specify what your second plowing is, 6 inches or 7. And this is a discussion at some point that will have to be had with taxpayers. Are they willing to have us plow on 3 inches if we're plowing on 2? Are they willing to run one less cruiser on Friday and Saturday nights? I mean, these are discussions at some point that should, and it will have to be had with the taxpayers.
Or another one, if you want to save money, has come up, is not have lifeguards at Kimball Pond.
Yeah.
There are lots of different options.
Sure.
None of them are really palatable, but.
Understood. On page 45 specifically, if I'm reading that correctly, the police department had asked for $22,000 in fuel expenses, but the select board put in the number at 28,800.
Fuel, oil?
Oil, vehicle, gas and oil.
Sorry, what page?
45.
We're at the bottom of 45.
No, the police department asked for 22 and we gave them 22. Look at 2025, down.
Proposed, okay.
It went down based on the, actual year to date and just
Yeah,
gas
my
prices.
mistake. I
Okay.
was looking at the wrong column. But I mean, that. Again, and the reason I ask that, because, that is. Besides plowing, there are other towns that have shifted their costs of police to the sheriff's department and the state police. I'm not advocating that it's a great idea, but. No,
Mhm.
I doubt it will ever happen with the town budget, but no, it's not a bad idea to have some of these things in place. If your increase does get voted at 1% or 2%.
Yes,
I guess like, to me, it's a little bit like the class size exercise that we went through at the school, where it's like, what is our, like, have a common understanding of what our target goals are. And then we as a community can decide like, are those the right goals? So with class sizes, being able to say like, oh, we're targeting, 18 to 20 students for fourth grade per teacher or whatever, it allows you to then like talk about if we believe that should be higher. So without being able to say we plow it 2 inches or and also like comparatively to communities as well, like. And I realize we cannot recoup all of our money on these changes, but I do think it's worth inspecting. And I want to say that I can see that the select board was very thoughtful before they brought this budget. Because I know that I can see that it's already been like trimmed from department proposals and things like that. And 3% does not strike me as like a particularly inflammatory number. It's just that to the earlier conversation, if it's 3% this year and then next year we have these interest payments hitting, then you have this like cumulative effect of like in 4 or 5 years, the budget's then going to be that much higher, like total. So I think it's worth the select board taking some time to actually document like what are our expectations of like with the department heads, sorry, whoever it's appropriate.
I think that's in place.
Okay,
And that's what this budget is based on.
okay,
And your question was, if
What are
it
they?
has to be cut, where would it come from? It wouldn't be cutting back police patrols or going to less than 24 hours a day first. If
Sure.
$1 million is cut, those would be things that would have to happen. So I think that
I mean, my question
I'm
was,
not
what if
sure.
we're like closer to zero, so it's $203,000, not a
Yeah,
million.
that would largely come from road shimming and paving.
And my point is like, does it have to? Like, we have
Well,
seen
your
that
other-
play out before, we've not fixed the roads.
Mhm.
So what if you just said, well, we're not gonna take it from roads, then what would it come from?
I think that's a hypothetical that next year's select board would have to wrestle with.
Okay,
And it could be any of those. Do you not provide paramedics 24/7? Do you not
Okay.
have police coverage 24/7? Those do not plow until there's 4 inches on the road. Those are things that you'd have to look at depending on how big your cut was. But I think there'd have to be. I don't think you'd have those discussions until you had to, because those are clearly not what the board wants to do.
This
And
is
you'd
sort
have
of
to
like a discussion
prioritize.
with the school. They went through all that tier type thing year after year. And really what it comes down to, if you cut the budget, it's back to the school board to figure out what they're going to cut, same as they would be here. The select board would have to figure out what they're going to cut. They're going to look at the priorities at that moment in time.
yeah,
But
I
I
get
think,
that.
I've been asking the question now for years. It would be nice if if in these write-ups you had the policy is probably the most simplest for the highway department about plowing.
Mhm.
There's a set policy that describes that. And maybe the same thing on the police. What's the call time out? Are you going to have 24-hour service? And how soon do you want the response to your house? If you have only 3 cruisers instead of 6 and 3 people instead of 6, it's going to be a longer time. The fire department, if they have 2 ambulances. If you say, well, we're going to cut one of the ambulances out, we're not going to spend a huge amount of money and 5 years out, then you only have one ambulance, and that has a specific effect on how soon probably the call gets to your house.
Mhm.
But, I think if those are articulated, it would be another step to say, here's the kind of discussion that you would have if you start to slice the budgets that are presented, whatever the number is.
I think messaging is so important in everything, but especially with this, as Dawn is saying, because not everyone obviously comes to the budget meetings. Where would this kind of messaging be able to go out? And who would do that messaging? Would it be just a public hearing? Would the select board provides it for this? Here's what you're looking at. Just practical conversations. This is what we're talking about, or what potential of what you could lose.
I think
Messaging.
if you look at page 86, you can see there that the column that has the big numbers in them. And I just looked down through it before I came here. You've got personnel administration is $1.2 million. You've got police departments, $1 million. The combined ambulance and fire departments, another $1.2 million. The highway department is $2.3 million. And the transfer stations is $800,000. I mean, you'd start with those topics probably as to, you start with the biggest items first probably, and you'd start to say, what are we going to cut out of those? But you got 5 groups basically that are, well, you got 6 groups that are almost $1 million or more. And they're all services related. So you're going to cut services.
Yeah.
The CIP has already moved out a whole bunch of things like the playing fields, redoing field number 1 for $100,000 and some thousand. We just said, prioritize it. We've got a field, we can use it when it's dry, but it's way less important than having another radio in a police cruiser. Not that those two relate number wise.
I think if this committee wants the select board to get more granular, then this committee would need to not be in favor of the select board's budget, which would compel the select board to decide if they wanted to do something about that. I'm not suggesting that, I don't feel that way. But at this point, as you said, the select board has given us what they think makes sense. And if the select board is compelled to do something different, either because we don't support the budget or ultimately the voters don't support the budget, then I think they're going to get that they would be in a position where they would have to have those hard conversations. They've already had a lot of hard conversations to get to this point.
Yeah, I'm frankly surprised. I thought people would be delighted with the 2.99%.
I, for one, am.
I am, yes. And I have to say, listening to the 2 work nights that you had, that the select board went through with Neil, that there was so much thought put into it. I think the changes that they've made have been good. And I want to thank you anyway for all the work that was done, because it is difficult. And just listening to how you went through the process, it's fascinating, and I appreciate all that you did.
Thanks, Deb.
I'm pleased with where it's at now. I'd like to see it lower, but we weren't at the 2.99 when it started, so.
I'd like to reiterate again what Krista brought up, and you said you could do it, is to just look at this for 3 years out.
Yeah.
So, because we know these bonds are coming, and they've been the real curveball that we've received this last couple of years, and just show the impact of that. So people, number one, will be informed and they'll be prepared. And if they have a discussion, then they can say,
Right.
let's not vote for that. Let's wait for the state to do something to us.
Yeah, and Ken, I think just for what it's worth, I don't think what you're hearing actually is necessarily a lot of objection about the 2.99, because that, if we look at some of the benchmarks that we spent 2 or 3 meetings talking about, that's going to look pretty reasonable, right? And your job is to come up with a prudent and responsible budget, and I think you can defend that pretty well. The thing that is in my mind is, what are we looking at 2 or 3 years out? And so, because it's not going to be 2.99, all else being equal, 2 or 3 years out, we're not going to be at 2.99 because of some of the, if we vote yes on everything. And That's not to say we shouldn't vote yes on all these things. It's more, that's what's in my mind is not so much 2.99 for 25, but what the implications are for 27, 28.
If I could go back to the spreadsheet, where it had the bond payments and the CIP, for the year, page 94, lines 176, 177. If you look at, the combination of capital and bond payments from 2025 to 2026 is going up about 200,000. The following year, again, about 200,000, which in the scheme of things, 200,000 is a pretty small number. It's been levelized in 2020, it's even just like 30,000 increase.
We can bring the, sort of look at the years and level that out. And if we will probably bring that back in January. I think the CIP committee is still doing work to try to level that out a little more.
I'd just like to say I'm pretty happy with 2.99%. Going back to the book that we were given last year, 2023, we were at 7.53%. 2024, we're at 4.87%. And last year, the department heads were asking for 27% increase. This year, the department heads are only asking for an 18% increase. And yeah, I think 2.99 is pretty good.
I would just add that department heads don't necessarily look at the bottom line, so they do their budgets. So I don't think it's fair to say they were looking for an 18% increase.
I'm sorry.
Just to be fair to them.
Maybe we get scammed. I don't know.
And you mentioned in passing Kimball Pond and lifeguards, and I just on page 71, just noticed some commentary in there saying, could we charge for a pass? And I'm curious if there's conversation about sticker for that or plans to offset that cost.
There has been a little bit of discussion about that. The board thought at this point, no, that we don't charge for use of the tennis courts or things like that. So it would be a real step to do that. But that doesn't mean that in, another year or two, that might not be something that's suggested.
For the tennis court card.
It's all pickleball now.
Yeah, pickleball.
Can I ask about a note under the objectives for the town clerk? Which is page 28.
Thank you.
Again, I just applaud these narrative summaries that go along with the numbers. It's appreciated. It's very much appreciated. But just thinking back to the discussion last year about voting machines, I'm wondering if you can elaborate on the second departmental objective, which says conduct municipal election utilizing LHS's image cast vote tabulator for the first time.
So we have currently 1980 version voting machine, which is
Bertha,
approved in the, at best, Bertha. The state has authorized 2 other machines that can be used. And Testing 1, 2, 3. It is working. Now we're good.
Congrats too on finding that last 100th of a point that got it below 3.
Yeah.
It just happened to come out that way. You could hear me screaming in the office. Ask the people here. All right, it's below 3, just barely though.
Okay, yeah, so we will
printed it out
open it to
early.
public comment for whoever wants to go first.
Christopher Gross, 76 Checkerberry Lane. I didn't have any specific questions about the budget. Thank you guys for all the work that you do on the budget. I know it's a lot of work. I do budget work myself. I just wanted to give some of the public's opinion. 2.99 isn't bad. It's just that it's, 5% the year before that. It's 6% the year before that. It's 3% this year. It's never going the other way. And we're anticipating having huge expenses coming up, unavoidable expenses coming up, and it's compounding what the public already sees as a high budget. Krista, I appreciate you talking about the exercise of, what if it gets voted down by the public. I think it's a good exercise for all the departments to have an efficiency budget of a 0% increase, to see what a 0% increase looks like and to start from that and then have a prioritized list of things you need. And I know that's part of what you do, having a prioritized needs list and picking and choosing what you need. But it's a good exercise to have that as a fallback. If it does get voted down, what is that base that you need to operate on? That doesn't include things like salary increases that you obviously have to have that are contractually obligated. But I don't know, it's from the public standpoint, it's frustrating. I moved here 10 years ago. My taxes were $7,900. This year, they're $14,000. They've gone up 77% in 10 years. And we talk about if we had to cut this 3% increase, what services would we cut? I want to know in the 10 years that I've been here, my taxes have gone up 77%. What services have increased? Because my services haven't increased with the amount that the budget has increased. So what sort of spending is there? What sort of waste is there? What can we really look at that is a necessity? What can we cut if we have to be more efficient? And that's all I got, guys. But thank you for the work that you guys do. I appreciate how difficult it is.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. If I can respond to that just really quickly, thank you again for your comments. I do think, at least I can speak to the past like 5 years or so. And we all know it. So somebody step in and correct me if I'm wrong. A lot of the more recent increases have been not due to operating budget increases so much at like the overall increases to your tax, but like various different bonds, I think, that have been taken out and then come in to the budget as interest. Like, I think when I joined the budget committee, was it a $30 million bond that was done like
No.
a handful of years ago for the school?
No,
it was 10.
it was,
10, thank you.
it was 40 to start with and it
Thank
got down
you.
to 10.
See. There's always reliable, but various, and that was like a lot of different capital improvement
Mhm.
things, including a roof.
Mhm.
Pretty sure, yeah. So just to add some color to that, like, anyway, some of the big ticket items that have caused increases, at least in the past 5 years, have been bonds, either for roads or the school capital projects.
Another example would be all the state requirements on doing culverts. The town used to be able to do a large culvert and not have to do all the wetlands type permits. And Neil probably could give a whole bet also for something that cost $80,000 10 years ago. Now it's $300,000. order of magnitude, that's
Yeah.
not exact numbers, but it's huge increases to anything that you try to do with road improvements, which we know we've got a lot to do.
I think it's important too to note that a lot of our funds that maybe we were receiving from the state have been cut back. And so we have less to deal with trying to meet the needs that we have been.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Debbie.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, not to pile on, but Mr. NATO is giving us an advanced view of how much less we can expect for the things we're obligated to cover under the special education. And the Department of Environmental Services is compelling us to spend $4.015 million to clean up chemicals that have been accumulating for 50 years. So before you or I were here. So it does feel like the money is going nowhere for in terms of what you can see tangibly.
And I raise this because like you mentioned your bill, like in the past 5 years since I've sat on this committee, I opened my bill this year and my bill was up like $5,000 since I moved into my house. And I'm like, how did this happen? I'm on the budget. I mean, not how did it happen? It's being a joke, but and so like I assume more people are gonna come up and talk about. I don't know, maybe everybody will come up and say they love the budget this year, but that it's not made up. Yeah, you're like, I'm sure your bill has gone up like that. And I think we all are sitting here racking our brains to figure, and Neil and the select board included, like, what can we not do? So anyway, we derailed public comment. Does someone else want to come up?
Lauren Clement, 86 Maple Street. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for the thoughtful conversation here. I actually very much so enjoy hearing the questions and the feedback. There's lots to learn and it helps you understand the process here. I have a question about the $1 million bond sledge removal. I believe Ken said it was structured at approximately 10 years because in approximately 10 years, it's due for an additional clean out. And I thought Neil said sometimes that could be 20.
I said 10 to 20.
Okay, 10 to 20. When discussing that, it's been noted that there's considerable savings doing this piggybacked onto our other project. But we haven't heard what that considerable savings is. So if we weren't doing this other major project, I was curious if how much more than $1 million this project would cost us every 10 years.
Mentioned that 14 million.
It would be $14 million instead of $1 million.
No, I don't think we have those numbers yet. We're still waiting for the final numbers.
The 14 million was if we didn't build the sludge pond.
No, and that's not what I'm discussing. I'm saying if we didn't have our sludge fund or being built and the town needed to remove the $1 million expense of sledge to wherever it would go, what would it's been stated since I've heard this conversation that there's considerable savings by piggybacking the two together, but we haven't heard if is considerable savings, 40,000 or 500,000. That piggybacks onto one other question is by building this retaining area over at the wastewater, when it is engineered 10 years out again, when we're due to clean that up again, because it's a perpetual thing, are we going to be able to deposit the waste in 10 years into this receptacle in town to again continue to save, or is it gonna be locked up and there's no more adding sledge 10 years later?
I don't know, Neil, can you answer that?
It's not likely that 10 years from now it could be used.
It would probably be capped. So this is a one.
We don't know exactly what
environmental rules will be in place.
Weren't the
But it's not likely.
guesstimates of if we had to haul it away, haul it to Canada or whatever, those numbers were many, many millions.
That is for the
The sludge.
septage cleanup at the transfer station. So the high number for the sludge removal was 1 million, and we're expecting that to come down. The engineers are finishing that. They've been slower than they should have been. So we'll have that number to tell you exactly what the cost difference is. Okay, I was trying to just look 10 years out and what are we gonna get slapped with again when we have to do this maintenance? And then was curious if by building this massive sledge retention thing, if we again had the opportunity to save money in 10 years, but it sounds like probably not.
It's a capped land.
Cap done, no more depositing. Okay, thank you. Something, and I believe it's in the book, but I was just curious if we know out of all the bonds that are through the town, if we know when our next one is to finalize, so we actually have an annual payment that drops off.
We do.
The something to look forward to.
I believe the open space bond for the Rice property would drop off after 2025.
In 2025
After 2025, that's $20,000.
at $20,000.
The big drop, the big next drop is from 2026 to 2027. The road bond that was done refinanced the fire station, but did not extend that. So the fire station is paid off in 2026, and that bond payment drops $244,000.
You should highlight that stuff in the presentation. I think it's something optimistic to hang on to. Back to if people want to trim a budget on the floor, I know we've talked about the lifeguards, but someone can't go up and say, hey, I want to cut $10,000 and make sure it's the lifeguards. That with the bottom line budget, it just goes back to the select board. And then you would be reducing $10,000 from the $200,000 increase, and then it would be subject to the select board to make that decision, right? So there's no line item cutting. Okay, just wanted clarification there. And then one other comment, because the ballot machines came up and Neil was talking about a check mark. I believe when Sarah Parashina was explaining this, another feature of those ballot machines were if you accidentally did an overvote or an undervote and you throw your ballot in, the machine's going to indicate that to you so you don't waste your time on a.
You mean if I voted for 2 people when it should have been 1?
It's going to give it back to you and give you an opportunity to
Do it again.
amend it. I don't know if you can redo it, but you got to talk to the people and maybe get a new ballot, but it was something to note. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks, Len.
Coda, 400 Gould Hill Road. I think overall, you've done a good job. You, the town, select people, and along with Neil, have done a good job on the budget. I have a question on the reserve funds that are being used. Neil, could you put those slides up again?
The fund balance?
Yes, the fund balance.
Oops. It's easier than, not as easy as it looks.
What is the fund balance that we're starting with and from which we will withdraw the 360,000?
basically 758,000.
Okay, so that will leave us with, give or take, some $400,000.
Give or take,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. How do we replenish that?
Through getting more revenues, actual revenues during the year than we had budgeted or projected, as well as spending less than we had budgeted.
And what if it goes the other way?
It can't on the expenditures. On if it does on revenues, then we just have less. For what we're projecting, say for calendar year 2024, we're anticipating revenue would be over budget by $60,000 and expense under budget by 85,000.
Okay. What I'm driving at is it possible at some point down the road for it to get to the point where a warrant article would be needed for the town residents to put money back into that fund balance?
I guess that has not happened in my time on the board. I think we try to be very conservative to make sure that there is going to be a fund balance available so that it could help levelize taxes going forward in future years.
You would have to totally misdo your tax rate and everything to have your fund balance go below. I've experienced that. So that
In another
could
town, I hope.
in another town, yes. Before I was there. But to be clear, the fund balance at the end of 2023 was $2,544,572. So what we're talking about here is the fund balance beyond the 5% that DRA kind of requires. DRA recommends you keep a fund balance of between 5 and 15%. Fortunately, here we can keep it at the 5%, largely because people pay their taxes and they pay them on time, because that's your cash flow in your whole time. We're only collecting, we start our budget January 1st, we collect money in July and we collect money almost in December. So we're and we have to pay the precincts and the school and the money they collect. So you have to keep that we keep 5%. We're able to do that.
Okay, thank you. And just a comment on the matter of recycling, where there were comments by people on this committee tonight that we do less than a spectacular job on recycling in this town. Does that, and somebody commented that it's a surprise that for a town such as Hopkinton that we don't do a better job, and that may or may not be. I don't really know, but my question is, does that take into account the fact that Webster residents are have not been required, to use green bags? And so therefore we don't know, or do we know, whether or not Webster people have participated in the recycling program? That may be an unanswerable question, and so I'm just throwing it out as a matter of thought. And then finally, my last comment really brought up by a couple of comments that our personal taxes have increased so much over the years, and indeed they have. And there are factors over which we don't have any control, and some of you have mentioned them. The state has pushed down a lot of costs onto the backs of local taxpayers. One of them being, for example, the share that the state had been paying toward pension plans. We're being choked on those amounts of money. And it doesn't look like the state is ever going to return to what I think is, or ought to be, its rightful position on sharing costs such as that. I think the other things that we need to remember is that over the years, we voters have voted to increase certain activities within the town. For example, when we first moved into town 40 years ago, I believe that our fire department was totally a volunteer department. Am I correct? And we've since then gone to essentially a full-time department. Am I correct on that? Well, that's something that we, the voters, said we want this town to do. Whether or not I agree with that is irrelevant here. I just need to have us keep in mind that we have had control over some of the things that have increased our tax base. And personally, I'm very pleased that we have a full-time fire department. I think that's really very important. We also have increased the number of police officers that we have had from part-time to full-time. I don't know whether or not we even have any part-time officers now, but I do remember going back in time that we had not as many full-time officers as we have now, but that's something that we, the voters, said that we want. So I thought, in fairness to everybody, that we ought to keep in mind those factors. We, the voters, had control over this thing, or some of these things, and we have exercised that control, I think, to the benefit of the town. And those are the only comments and questions that I have. Thank you again for your work.
Thank you very much.
I'd just like to say to Arnold, just take a look at the census figures in the last 40 years. In 1970, Hopkinton was a town of 1,500 people. And we're now 6,000. So over the last 40 years, we've had to add people to cover the increased volume of services.
Yep.
I'm a little older than you, Carton. Mr. Coda. I'm a little older than you. When I was growing up here, we had one cop on Friday night and Saturday night. That was it. We've changed.
If you're older than I am, tip of the cap to you, because I turned 89 this year, so
You got me by a little.
top of the ladder.
You got me by a little.
And this might be a teaching moment. I mean, there are people in our community who are saying that we should increase our population, that we should build multifamily houses in Kentucky Village. And that will have a cost associated with it for providing those greater volume of services.
Good evening, Tricia Lambert, 305 Galloping Hill Road. So I'm usually very vocal, but I do want to thank you, especially Madam Chair. Those questions are what we want from this committee. We want the hard questions answered, even if it means going back and looking at different ways of doing things. I do believe, if I'm correct, this committee is part of their process is to craft a budget. In other words, it's provided from the town and then from the school, and then to provide your budget. That is what I think people are looking for. And I think whether it's 2.99 or 3.2 or whatever it is, I think people will accept it as long as those discussions are happening. So I want to thank you, and I appreciate all the questions. I really do. And I think that people hearing that will as well. There were a lot of details, I think, that were brought up. Some of them already brought those questions up. So I don't think I'm going to get into too much detail tonight on that. I guess the one point that I think would also be very helpful, I appreciate looking forward, because understanding what it's going to be going out, but it was also brought out what we've been paying going forward, or I'm sorry, going backwards. So if we had a 5% and a 4% or 7%, the previous 5 years, we'll say like from 2019 to 2020, from COVID forward, it would be really great to have that evaluation so we can see what has been approved, so that we can go forward and look to see what would be reasonable for that. And I think that type of information would be really helpful. So forward and backward. So I think I'll leave it there, but I do thank you for your time, and I do really much appreciate these questions. So thank you.
Thank you.
Dave Lambert, 305 Galloping Hill. This question just kind of goes back to the transfer station and the recycling. So you brought up the question that I had too about, you talk about the number of people that are recycling, and then you're saying, comparing it to like Henniker or Concord. So yeah, take 25% of Webster potentially out. Then also, how many people that actually go to the transfer station are recycling. So you've got a good chunk on my street, at least half the street has their garbage picked up. So are we counting those people and then looking at how much recyclables there are? So let's say, I don't know, 30% of town gets their garbage picked up. That might be high, I don't know. Are we focusing on the 100% in our town, but only 70% actually go to the transfer station? So we're saying we're automatically 30% less than Henniker. Like, those people are guaranteed if they're having it picked up, they're not gonna have their regular garbage picked up and then show up on Saturday with their bottles and cans.
For the
So, and
record, I
then,
thought about that once.
what?
I said, for the record, I thought about that once. I decided not to do it because it sounds terrible.
For the record, I do.
You do?
We do get our garbage picked up and we do go to the transfer station.
Yeah, so do I, but,
Okay.
But your
But-
point is still good, like.
yeah.
But I mean, like,
There's no-
overall.
There's no incentive for me to do that. When empty trash comes to get my trash, it is up to 10 bags every time, and they do not charge me per bag. I never get to 10 bags at my house. So, I mean, I could just fill a bag full of recycling. It would cost me no more money. I mean, it would cost me in my taxes in a roundabout way, but you're
Right.
absolutely
I
right.
mean, it's one fact when you're saying we're so far behind other towns. Are we really? Like, do we know who's showing up? Are they actually? Because when I go every week, I have to say, every car that I see at the hopper has already been at the recycling thing. Like, I rarely see someone just, I mean, unless it's out of town, but for the most part, everyone seems recycling, and it seems to be a ton of recyclables flowing out of every bin, which is great. But that's just one of those things, like when we're comparing ourselves to another town, do we know? And there was one other thing I just forgot. Oh, and then how are you comparing how much recyclables to how much goes in the hopper? So as far as like a lot of recycling stuff, I mean, I buy all my milk in the glass bottles from the farm and I bring the glass bottles back to the farm. So that's less glass than the thing. I don't drink any soda. I don't drink any wine, alcohol. I have no aluminum cans. I don't drink it. I have a Yeti. I fill with water from my refrigerator and that's my day. Or I have my little reusable metal K-cup. I put a half a scoop of grinds in. Grinds go in my garden. So like, I have a lot less recyclables because I'm not buying as much stuff but everything I do have, all the paper, cardboard, down to, tissues, I recycle everything that's paper. So I guess I know our town is very, environmentally friendly, seems to be, or at least they try to look like on the outside. It just seems like, I think people are probably recycling as much. Just when you compare it to another town, are we really that far behind?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of other little pieces and please do not go to clear bags and look at my garbage. What a waste of time and resources that is. So, all right, that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That just like made me have a question. Does anyone know? Because like I thought about signing up for M&T and then found out they don't do any recycling. I wonder what it would take to have them do like one kind of recycling item. Because I realized that they would not want to like pay people to sort single stream. But if they could just be like, hey, if you recycle aluminum cans, and then it's like they don't have to worry about sorting it. But at least it's like.
I mean, I would argue the incentive should be on the other end. You should make it, and we had this discussion last year because we've been paying contractors basically to take their waste. I mean, our fees, but when we take contractor waste or a hauler waste, they should be paying for the privilege. And we should be making the money.
And they are now.
They are now.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was a long time coming.
But that's a good factor that he brought up, and
Yeah.
that is lifestyle,
Right.
which would be very difficult probably to measure. But that is a factor to take into account. We are, like the person said, I'm surprised Hopkinton isn't doing better. Well, perhaps we are, in the sense that we're actually changing our lifestyle more before even having to go. That's interesting.
Thank you, Dave. Any other public comments for the evening? Yeah.
Can I clarify something that Lauren asked?
Sure.
Because I agree with you, we should highlight things that are positive where we can.
So I think what you were asking, and I feel like I did this to Amanda last time, so sorry for always putting words in people's mouths. How much would it cost to move the sludge if we didn't have a pit to throw it in? And I know we don't have that number, but he's saying, let's find out the number so that we can highlight it as money we're saving.
And to know what it's gonna cost us. 10 years.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question? So you use the word compel from the environment, DES, so it's not required, but they're compelling you, is that the word we're using?
Oh, it's required. I was using those interchangeably. Yeah.
It's required, let's say, when you do it is not quite certain, depends on when you can find the money, I guess is what.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. The septic lagoon cleanup is required. Yes.
Required, and is there a time frame? Sort of?
Yeah, right now we have the grant. We went DS.
I think the way that I heard it is that, one, we have favorable financial terms now. So there's some interest in doing it now because the financial terms are good. We have we have this revolving fund that is.
It's a revolving loan fund.
Partially, so that's sort of one piece. The second piece, I think, in your question that I heard is. If we don't, we are out of compliance, right? So we're under an order from the state to clean it up. If we don't follow through. It's not sure, we don't know exactly. They may compel us to clean it up. They may take over the cleanup and bill us.
Did they say that?
Share what I heard.
I appreciate
That's what
that.
I heard too.
That's our list. That we shared.
We've been contributing for 50 years, correct? Yes. Okay. Have there been any lawsuits on this issue? Just curious. Okay. So this revolving loan, that's a revolving loan fund for the state has always been there. We're just tapping into it for this purpose, or is it made specifically for this?
No, it's always there. And there were 85 municipalities that applied for this, and we were ranked 6. Anybody from, I think it was 8 on, did not receive anything.
Why were we ranked 6?
Based on the criteria, because
We
this
have
project
the
needs
worst-
to get done.
Okay. Maybe the size of it or amount of,
I don't want
you
to,
don't know. Okay.
I don't have that in front of me. There is a criteria list that I don't want to say something that
Fair
I
enough.
don't,
Fair enough.
I
Okay.
don't have it memorized.
Okay, so they put a carrot out there that says, hey, we'll give you some money to clean it up if you do it like now. And so we don't want to lose that.
I would not put it that way. They've said you need to clean it up now, and we
Here we help
applied
you.
for the grant, and our project ranked high enough to get funds.
Okay. Are there any towns that have been fined regarding this or said they're not going to clean it up and have been fined or that you're aware of? I understand it's
That I
not
don't
your
know.
business to know, but that would be an interesting to know whether that has happened. Okay. I thank you. I'll look more into it.
Sabrina has her hand up.
Yeah. All right, Sabrina, we're gonna get to you next. We have one more in-person question.
Yes, Michael Foley, 54 Willoughby Road. My comment would be, there was a great presentation, but I think if you read that regulation at the meeting when we present this, instead of having somebody from the board or Ken or somebody from the select board to just say, we have to do this because of a law or regulation. If you really just read the synopsis of that regulation, so it just tells everybody right up front, this is not hearsay information. This is not, misinterpreting the words of encouraging us to do it. We have to do it. And that would set the framework of, okay, let's move back about changing it, what it is, and just deal with the issue that's in front of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Sabrina, you're unmuted.
Whoops,
I
she
think.
moved, sorry.
Sabrina,
Hang on.
Okay, I lied. Now you're unmuted.
Hi. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi.
These people keep moving around on here.
Am I on?
Yes, now you're on.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Neil. I'm so sorry that I was not able to join on time, and I might have missed this, but my understanding with respect to the sludge cleanup is that we would face significant fines as well from the state if we did not do this in a timely manner. Am I speaking out of turn, Neil?
I'm not sure I can speak to that.
Okay. I'll double check because
That's been the way, and DS certainly eventually could order it done and then send us the bill, or do it and send the bill. That's sort of their process, but that's a long process.
yeah. All right. Well, I will look into that because I don't know who I was talking about that with, but that was my understanding is that, and I assume it's at the very least in the, the realm of possibility that we could face significant fines as well. So not only is it required under law, but, I think that there's potential fines at play too. So thanks. I just wanted to add that to the sludge removal conversation.
Thanks, Sabrina.
Thank you all.
So I think feedback for the town, something that has been like now echoed a few times is like, let's make clear in our town, presentation.
And the semantic difference between the sludge at the wastewater treatment plant and the septage at the transfer station.
The septic, which turns into sludge.
No, the sludge turns into septic. Septage is old and dry.
No, septage turns to sludge.
Sludge is the yummy leftovers.
But the septic lagoons, but the septage lagoons are old and they've dried out and created berms
Yes.
that are decades old, and it's called septage, right?
I think it's sludge, but that's
Fuck it out.
Move on.
We'll clarify that at the next meeting.
Are you coming back?
Yeah,
Okay.
I can ask. Lauren Clement, 86 Maple Street. On this subject, is there any other, and this isn't about fining and whatnot, but other towns in somewhere in the US must have had to clean up these sludge lagoons. We haven't, you love the sled. We haven't seen any other model, or I mean, I feel like we're uneducated voters here saying, yep, let's do it. That's the price tag. I think it would be a helpful exercise if, in Nebraska or somewhere, there's an example of what this process looks like. It seems like we're going into this because someone said you should clean that up, and it'd be super unfortunate if 5 years down the road they say, that it's out there, maybe it would have been okay. So I don't know how we get that research, but it would be a helpful element to sell that this really needs to get done, I guess, is what I'm speaking to.
I'm guessing we're not the unique person, we're not the unique town in New Hampshire, number one.
Right.
We hired an engineering firm who has done this, I'm sure, before. So those things are there. We just need to articulate it.
Yeah, that they must have models.
So this is the budget presentation. There will be the full presentation at the bond hearing, as well as certainly this is a separate article, which will have a lot more detail as part of the presentation at town meeting too. So, and we can bring more to the budget committee too. If you want to go through the whole, we didn't put the slides up with the sort of where the lagoons were going and all of the sort of detail, but we could do that if you want it.
It seems like that's probably like an item for the follow-up to this, Neil. It's just like a deeper dive on just so we're educated, and also then kind of as a practice run for educating the town about it.
I think the
Thank you.
questions are going to be presented, and it'd be nice to be ahead of them, so you have the correct answers. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I'm going to amend what I said. The stuff in the lagoons that's 50 years old is contaminated soil at this point, right?
That's true. I just want to follow up on the availability of the funds that you said we rank 6 in that. In
This round of funding.
And so if we don't take the money this year, like we would have to reapply and start all over again, and then we can rank in a different, but the money would potentially be available, or it's just we don't
the
know.
likelihood I think we would certainly sink down if we refuse, if we're in line for the money and we don't take it, it certainly doesn't move us to the top the next year.
You don't fall to the top?
No.
Any other comments before the committee tonight?
How much is the grant?
Okay, so Dave is asking how much the grant is for.
So there's two parts of it. First, you can borrow from the Clean Water Revolving Fund, which has its advantage, which we went through, and it's 401,000.
State rate.
It is at a much lower rate, as well as the 1% construction loan and then the forgiveness before the loan goes into effect.
Thank you. Any other public comment before the committee tonight? Okay, I see no hands raised on Zoom, so I'm going to assume that that public comment has concluded. Thank you, everyone, for a lively discussion tonight. Any other business to come before the committee? I will comment on just a reminder on schedule at the end here, but any other business? Okay. Hearing none, then just a friendly reminder, we have a meeting next week where we will have not the formal presentation of the school, but kind of the preliminary presentation sort of the school.
Talk a little bit about what it is you're looking for, because I don't want to be one incomplete, nor do I want to be redundant to our actual presentation in January.
Sure.
Give you all thumbnail sketches to where we're at right now, so you know.
Yeah.
And then you can decide if you want to do that next week or not do that next week. That's up to you.
I won't be here next week regardless, so I don't want to answer on behalf of the committee. How are folks feeling?
How about if I give you the thumbnail sketch first, and then you can decide which one.
Like that.
Okay.
So in our latest iteration of the budget last week, at our last meeting, we were at 2.79%, with an overall $748,000, 536 increase. We made some changes, so we had a long discussion here about use of the special education trust. So we actually acted on that at our last meeting. We withdrew 240,000 of the 276 from that trust to help us cover our upside down in special ed, which is right now at about $440,000. That reduced what was in the budget. Some of that was anticipated for the future. Other pieces, big changes were, of course, we had an assistant business administrator this year. We will not have an assistant business administrator next year. So that money came off, and then some savings from hiring practice that we've talked about for the last 2 or 3 years. So overall, we're at 2.79%. And that does include one new position at the middle high school to deal with the big bump in class size. That's the current 8th grade, which is close to 100. And that's been a manageable thing in the middle school model. It will be a far more difficult thing in the high school model for scheduling reasons and whatnot. You know, it's much easier to divide 90 some kids when the curriculum is the same than to divide them equally. So there's one position that would be shared between English, science, and math, splitting up some fifths. We had the only thing really left on our discussion table in terms of changes. We had a pretty robust discussion again about the request for a special ed coordinator that would work under our special ed director. And essentially, this is a role that would assist the special ed director in her role. As we talked about, one of the things to think about is outplacements were always managed by a special ed teacher in the past. And when Mandy came in, that position went away. So she's managing all of those outplacements, but many of the LEA meetings that occur. So whenever you have a special ed meeting of any kind, you need a licensed education agency, which is essentially the school, to be at that meeting. There are about 400 some odd of those per year. But they did a nice job of breaking down what that position would be. I would say that the board is not yet settled on where we're at in regards to that position and whether or not, I think everybody feels it has merit. There'll be questions as to whether or not we can afford it. So that is on the table to still be discussed. The warrants, we are having a discussion about our vehicle currently. So whether or not we do that this year or whether we add money to that vehicle trust for future years. Tech would be a warrant, the CIP ongoing. We've talked about where those needs should be, and that's usually somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000. I think the difference with the school budgets and the way it's managed in the town budget is, you can bond out a road. We tend to operate through annual warrants, so you see it in a more immediate effect. It's not the cost down the road, it's the cost this year. Special education, as you know, is our big upside down, which drove, when you look at the initial, just the expense side was pretty high. So that is still in place, but we did remove those anticipated costs from that to do it through the trust. We have two contracts that are up this year. The HEA contract, which is still in process in terms of being voted on, but complete in terms of function. But I believe the HA was voting on it today and the board will vote on it next week. And then we hope to wrap up our Teamsters contract later this week. So those two things will be there as well.
Does the 2.79 include the special ed coordinator?
It does not
Okay.
include that. It does include that one position of movements.
Okay. And sorry, any other quick questions for I was just going to say, again, I won't be here next week, so Debbie will be more than capable of stepping in as chair. So I'll leave it up to you guys if you want to have the meeting, but I think the last time we met, one of the reasons we put the meeting where it was is because those contracts would be shareable with the committee at that point. So just something to consider.
We will be meeting on Tuesday. That meeting would be on Wednesday. I can't speak to the Teamsters contract, but if the board approves the HEA contract, then those numbers would then be able to be shared publicly. Where we're at.
Is the special ed still approaching $1 million? You're going to take some out of a fund to reduce that down, I think, to 700 or 600,000. Is that still look like the same million that you're in total?
The increases are the same, but we did, the ask would be for the money through a warrant for the special ed trust rather than in the budget, as we discussed.
But it's still a total of $1 million when you put your arms around it.
Yes.
So warrant to replenish the trust to the tune of what's that number?
Probably about 200 we withdrew 240,000. Whether or not the warrant will be for $240,000 is still something we haven't determined yet, but it would be probably in that ballpark, I would say.
And how much was in the trust? I missed the number when you said.
The number that what it was currently or last week was 276. And we had a public hearing and withdrew 240,000. Okay. You covered this year unanticipated costs for outplacements. We've had a lot of discussion about outplacements as well. So just to sort of wrap your head around some numbers here, the range of costs for those will be somewhere on the low side, $70,000, and on the high side, over $200,000. So
For the out of placement,
between tuition and transportation.
200,000.
Transportation costs, again, depending upon where the student is going, can be as much as $80,000 on salary.
Rob, in the conversation about the special ed coordinator is, I know nothing, so, this might be a dumb question, but by adding capacity there, does that would that potentially lead to some cost savings in terms of being able to look for more efficient, comparable service to support the needs of the students, but more time to scope different options?
That was part of our discussion. Actually, I asked that exact question at our board meeting. So I asked the question, within my mind, I can foresee one specific savings almost immediately. And that is, we tend to try to hire, BA 3-4-5, in other words, years of experience, or master's 3-4-5 years of experience. In certain areas, that's more difficult to do. In special education, it is particularly difficult to do because of the complexity of the job. So, just to sort of like give you a sense as to the things that special ed teachers have to do in the process. So there's a referral meeting, an evaluation planning meeting, an evaluation summary meeting, and then the IEP itself, the annual evaluation, the triennial evaluation. Those are all meetings that are run. With a full caseload of 15 to 20 kids, that is a lot to expect from a new educator. So we end up hiring up the food chain, so to speak. So my thinking is, if that person is in place, we could potentially hire a young gun, so to speak, at a lower cost, because now we have another person who will train. And I think they'll come back, but some of the things that we talked about in terms of intervention, in education, we talk about tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, which essentially means tier 1 is opportunities that just about everybody gets. Tier 2 is opportunities that 3 out of 10 of us are going to get. And tier 3 is you really need some extra work, and that's one of us is going to get. So, it gets more complex. And perhaps with closer monitoring, we stay more in tier 1 and tier 2 and not in tier 3. But those, I think it's the question that's most on my mind, because I definitely see the merit. Question is, can I also see the cost savings when we're at a point in time when that is, we all sat through the meeting tonight. It's in the forefront of all of our minds.
So Mr. Nadeau, that would help with the actual services that are being provided once the student is there, but it wouldn't help with the student. We're not going to have any cost savings because of that hire if somebody comes in and we have to have the out of school placement. That's still going to rack up that bill and not change that. It's going to change once we already have the student, we know they're within school. And then we could hire someone potentially lower with lower grade because of services. It won't help.
That's my thing.
Thank you.
So those are things that I'm sure we will discuss again at next week's meeting and try to wrap our heads around the efficacy of this position. And again, whether or not we can afford it.
Now that would be another administrative position.
That is correct.
Yeah. So we're adding to that administration.
Adding these grossly up, you're looking at 748,000 for the base that you just talked about.
The operating budget.
CIP, you said 3 to 4, so that's $1.5 million. And you got special ed 750.
If you get to $1.5 million from 7 to 4.
I got 7.5 for the base.
Yeah.
300,000 for the CIP, 3 to 4.
Okay.
So that's $1.05 million. Then you got maybe special ed 750. And then the contracts probably.
Not set special ed, not 750 on the warrant. Let's.
Oh, no, I'm talking whole package.
Yeah, well, that's already in the budget.
Okay.
That's in the budget.
All right, that's good. And then
7.9 includes the special ed increases that we initially discussed when we were just talking about expense.
Yep. And then you got the contracts, 400,000 maybe.
I would prefer not to put numbers.
No, I'm just.
We've actually had a board meeting.
Well, let's talk about the last year's contract number. That's got to be around 300,000 or 400,000, correct?
I believe in the last contract, it was 370 somewhere.
So we're in ballpark of 4. So now we're at $1.4 million probably for a minimum of looking at as a presentation for the budget increase?
Donna, I'm.
No, I'm just-
Speaking numbers until we actually have the numbers.
I'm just trying to
I'm not-
regurgitate the numbers that you're rolling out.
I'm not gonna speak.
No, no.
Unless you're kind of muted.
You've rolled out these numbers in generality, I'm just generality. Let's go back to your point, we have big things coming next year. Obviously, we got, you're gonna have some increases here, you can't go zero.
Do you see the special ed cost increases leveling off? Decreasing based on the number of students that are enrolled and then perhaps might be graduating?
It's, I think there's always a new student coming along, and whether that's a student that's within our schools or outside of our schools. As many of you know, my wife has been a special education teacher, recently retired for 30 years here, and I know a lot about special education through her. And yes, there's a relative steady rate of students in need at every level. So I wouldn't say that necessarily. I think that in terms of the revenue side, if you're paying attention to what's going on at the state, the state's presentation at the Supreme Court yesterday on the Conval and what adequate education means, if you read the Monitor yesterday or followed that, rather interesting. Apparently you don't need heat, you don't need administration, you don't need buses. Buses are required by law. I'm pretty sure we like heat, and I'd like to see somebody run a school without administration. The education committee on the House side has been divided into, because of the workload, which makes sense, to a policy side and a finance side. And whether that makes that committee more efficient or less efficient, you can think about that in either direction. If it's a policy, then it's got to go to finance, and if it's in finance, then you have to go back to policy. Let's just say I'm not hopeful for changes in our revenue stream in the coming year. It's based on, the mechanics of what's going on. And
If I could back up, are we seeing a bump is my question in the special ed fund? Or sorry, special ed expenses for out of placement. Out of district placements. Are we seeing a bump right now?
let me get some actual numbers for you on that, so we can look at that number rather than me just guessing what that is.
Thank you.
Because we can certainly go back and look at where those are now.
Thanks.
My gut has an answer, but I don't want to go on my gut. I'd rather have actual data to tell you.
Thank you.